That's right, Jeff. We're back in the brain, but this time we're going to talk about the brain of the family members and other people who have a close relationship with an addict. Remember earlier, we talked about family members believing the myth that it's really just the alcoholic's problem, it's not their problem. And I think it's going to give everybody a little different take on that when they see how addiction actually affects the people closest to the addict. What's happening is that the stress of having a close relationship with somebody who's addicted to alcohol or other drugs actually impacts the brain and changes the way our brains function. You know, Jeff, you also had mentioned detachment. And, you know, I think it's most definitely the advice most often given to families. And it's also the advice they most often resist taking because they believe that detachment means do nothing. So, you know, they may try for a while, but as the problems mount, they themselves, it's not just the alcoholic or the addict that they're trying to save, they're also trying to save themselves. Because remember what we said about when alcoholics hit bottom, the family goes along for the ride, they hit bottom too. So we want to look at detachment in a new way where we are detaching from the problem. We're not trying to clean up the messes, fix all the problems. We detach from that, and only once we detach from that are we able to engage in the solution. So let's just take a little time to look at why it's so difficult for family members to detach in the respect of doing nothing. In everybody's brain, we have something called the amygdala. It's a little almond-shaped part of the brain that resides in the primitive brain. It's an unconscious part of the brain, and it is where what we call our survival instinct resides. When families are living around the unpredictable stress of a beloved alcoholic or addict, they never know when the next shoe is going to fall. They never know, you know, what is her mood going to be tonight? Is she going to be angry? Is she going to be withdrawn? Or is he going to get in his car when he's driving drunk? Is he going to come home late or not at all? Families are always dealing with these kinds of issues that are really difficult on them emotionally. And what happens is that the part of the brain that responds is the amygdala. The amygdala is sometimes called the little brain. And what scientists mean by that is it seems to be its own brain within the larger brain. It doesn't have to ask permission before it reacts because its job is our survival. So it's going to act really fast. In a way, it's sort of acting without thinking first. And there's some very interesting studies about how this works. Scientists took pictures of people's faces and they created like a slideshow, and they would have subjects in the study, and they would flash the pictures of these faces so fast that the subject's conscious mind could not pick up the images. So these pictures are flashing so fast that our minds can't see them, our eyes can't even see them, but the amygdala can see them. So the amygdala can tell when the facial expressions are angry or threatening, and the scientists can measure the brain activity. So when there's a facial expression that threatens us, you can see the amygdala light up and react. So what that's telling us is that the amygdala is actually seeing things and remembering things that we may not see at all. So it's really beyond the conscious mind. So when we're living with the stress of an alcoholic and we're feeling all that anxiety, oftentimes that's coming from an overactive amygdala that's been trained to react very quickly to the constant bombardment we're under from living with addiction. Now, when we talk about the amygdala, of course, that's not all we are. We also have our prefrontal cortex, and when the amygdala says, you know, danger and reacts very quickly, then it takes longer for our conscious mind to catch up with that. But when it does, then it reevaluates. So it's like, okay, is it really an emergency? And let me give you an example of that. If you're walking down a path and your amygdala Before your conscious mind notices, your amygdala sees a snake in the path and immediately tells you to freeze. And you do. But now your prefrontal cortex, which is a little slower, to come to, takes a look and says, no, it's just a stick. You see, you can proceed and you can keep walking. So that we have a balance there. Is it really an emergency or isn't it? But when family members are living with constant stressors from addiction, constant worry about a loved one, what happens is that becomes off balance. And we're seeing emergencies all the time. We're anxious all the time. We're having trouble with sleep. So it really does affect our brain physically and how our brain functions, which can create this anxiety. The other thing that's very, very important to understand is it also affects the developing brain of children. So children who are living in an alcoholic home are very much affected. Their brains are very much affected as they're developing. Let me give you a little example. Because of the kinds of stress, there can be neglect, there can also be abuse in some alcoholic homes, that as the brains are developing, it changes how the brain cells connect with one another. And so it's actually changing the structure of the brain, and as a result, changes how the brain functions. And this can lead to increased emotional issues in adulthood. It can even cause psychological problems in adulthood. Certainly with smaller children, we see things like depression, anxiety. We may see learning difficulties in school, acting out behavior. And sometimes it goes the other way, where the child becomes a perfectionist, but it's not healthy because it's very, very rigid. I have to be in control of everything because I can't trust my outer world. I can't trust the adults in my life. So when we're really thinking about this disease and what we need to do, we must never forget the children, because living with an addicted parent day in and day out, for any of those of us that have done that, we understand that has a profound effect on us. Today we understand that it really changes who we are. It changes who these children are, just the pure impact of the addiction and the stress upon the developing brain. Another thing that happens with children and their developing brains when they are exposed to an addicted parent or an addicted caregiver is that their brains also start responding to everything as if it's a threat. So the children can become very timid, they can become very nervous, and as adults, they may be less inclined to try new things. We often see this with adult children of alcoholics, that they don't like to try things that are new, they don't like to do things that they feel that they can't be good at right away, that there's always this sense of dread, or there's always this sense of threat in their life, and it can be very, very limiting on what they do in the world. And also, it shows us that, this is powerful enough. This is powerful, powerful stuff, that when a developing brain can be changed so radically to affect somebody throughout a lifetime. And it doesn't mean that family members and children of alcoholics don't recover from that and learn to become stronger and better people, but we have to remember that it's oftentimes an uphill battle in adulthood, and if we deal with the addiction now, we can sidestep all those problems for children in the future.